Elton John finally opens up about Ozzy Osbourne intro. For decades, Elton John and Ozzy Osbourne represented two very different faces of rock and roll. Elton was the flamboyant piano man with a flair for the theatrical and a heart soaked in ballads. Ozzy was chaos incarnate, the Prince of Darkness, howling through the inferno of heavy metal. But behind the fame, the feathers, and the fire, their paths crossed in ways few knew, ways that were painful, intimate, and nearly destructive. Now, for the first time, Elton John is finally speaking. What secrets has he been holding about Ozzy, and why has he waited until now to reveal them? Let's dive in. It was early 1997 when Elton John received a phone call that still lingers in his memory like a ghost. The sun hadn't risen yet over Windsor, and Elton was preparing for another press-heavy day following his tribute performance for Princess Diana. But this call wasn't from a reporter, a publicist, or even a fellow celebrity. It was from Ozzy Osbourne, slurred, erratic, and barely coherent. Elton had known Ozzy in passing for years. Their circles often overlap, especially in the UK music scene. Award shows, occasional backstage run-ins, and a few legendary parties that neither of them could quite remember. But they were never close. Ozzy was unpredictable, an untamed force. Elton, though once wild in his own right, had begun his journey toward sobriety and stability. But that call changed something. Ozzy wasn't calling for a favor, or to gossip, or even to collaborate. He was begging. "Mate, I think I'm dying," Ozzy had rasped. "I can't stop. I can't fucking stop." Elton froze. He'd heard these words before, from other friends, from himself. He recognized the desperation, the hollow ring of someone circling the drain. That morning, Elton didn't hang up. He listened. He stayed on the line. And in that moment, a strange, reluctant bond was formed. One rooted not in music, but in survival. What Elton later described in private journals, now quoted for the first time, was that this moment felt like watching someone scream from inside a burning house, but they're the one lighting the matches. In the weeks that followed, they began speaking more frequently. Elton would check in on Ozzy. Some calls went unanswered. Others were rambling, dark, filled with paranoia and hallucinations. Sharon Osbourne allegedly thanked Elton quietly at an event months later, telling him, "You were the only one who didn't give up on him." But Elton wasn't doing it for praise. He'd seen too many friends go under. Freddie, George, Whitney. He couldn't add Ozzy to that list, not without trying. Still, the calls came with a cost. Elton's husband, David Furnish, would later say that period took a toll on Elton's own recovery. He'd stay up nights worrying about Ozzy. He couldn't save everyone, but he tried. And just when Elton thought he had seen Ozzy hit rock bottom, the Vegas incident happened. The 1998 MTV Music Awards were meant to be a celebration of excess, spectacle, and genre-defying performances. And for a brief moment, it was just that. Elton John had been scheduled for a surprise duet with a pop sensation, while Ozzy, despite his deteriorating condition, was coaxed into a last-minute appearance honoring Black Sabbath. Backstage, the mood was tense. Elton had been informed Ozzy was on something, but the production team assured him everything was under control. He believed them until he saw Ozzy for himself. He looked like a ghost, Elton would later confess, sunken, wild-eyed, sweating through his leather like he'd been dragged through hell. Ozzy had no memory of rehearsals. He'd allegedly refused to take direction, slurring at stagehands and collapsing twice before being revived with a cocktail of stimulants. But what truly shattered Elton wasn't the chaos. It was what Ozzy whispered to him minutes before they were supposed to walk on stage. "I fucking hate this, mate. They're using me." Elton froze. This wasn't rock star bravado. It was something else. Despair. A man being puppeteered for the brand he no longer controlled. The performance went on, barely. Ozzy missed half his cues, shouted nonsense during transitional moments, and had to be pulled off stage after attempting to walk into the audience barefoot and bleeding from a broken heel. It was a disaster that the press spun into tabloid gold, but to Elton, it wasn't funny. It was horrifying. After the show, Elton confronted Sharon. "What are you doing to him?" he demanded. Sharon, furious, fired back. "Don't you dare question what you don't understand." Security had to separate them. Elton stormed out, refusing his after-party appearance, and booked a flight back to London that very night. For months, he wouldn't speak to anyone connected to the Osbournes. He was done. Whatever friendship had begun, whatever bond had flickered to life, was burned in that moment. But the silence didn't last forever. Not when Ozzy sent him something unexpected, a handwritten letter, torn, barely legible, and soaked in guilt. Most fans remember the 1998 MTV Awards for its high-octane performances, glitter-drenched stages, and the chaos that came with mixing egos and intoxication. But there's a story buried beneath the glitz, a backstage confrontation that never made headlines, a private implosion that few insiders dared to speak of, until now. Elton John had barely landed in Vegas before he started receiving warnings. "Ozzy's not in a good place," one assistant muttered. "He's been up for 2 days," said another. "Maybe don't expect too much from him tonight." Elton, already growing weary of these cryptic pre-show whispers, tried to brush it off. But when he saw Ozzy stumble into the rehearsal space, wide-eyed, muttering about voices and shadows, he knew this was no longer about a failing performance. This was a man unraveling in real time. Security footage, since leaked but never broadcast, shows Ozzy in a daze, bumping into equipment and shouting at reflections. At one point, he reportedly struck a crew member who tried to get him into makeup. And yet, the showrunners pushed forward, terrified of losing their main act. What happened next is a story that's lived in whispers for decades. Just before going on stage, Ozzy locked himself in a dressing room and refused to come out. Elton was sent in to talk to him, alone. According to Elton, the room was trashed, broken glass, overturned chairs, and in the corner, Ozzy, curled up, cradling a bottle of something clear. "I'm a joke, Reg," Ozzy murmured, using Elton's real name. "They love the freak. Not me. Not me." Elton sat beside him, stunned into silence. This wasn't rock star meltdown. This was a cry for help. Years of pressure, addiction, mental illness, and manipulation erupting in a single moment of horrifying clarity. Elton reportedly told producers he would not perform unless Ozzy was allowed to leave quietly and without cameras following him. They resisted. Elton walked out. The public never saw that side of the event. The tabloids claimed technical difficulties kept the duet from happening. Ozzy was painted as a harmless mess. Elton never addressed it publicly, until now. In his recent memoir, Elton devotes an entire chapter to the Vegas incident. "It was the night I realized Ozzy Osbourne was more prisoner than performer," he writes, "and no one was willing to open the door." The story of Ozzy Osbourne and Elton John is incomplete without confronting the toxic thread that wove their lives together for decades: addiction. But what many don't realize is that their bond wasn't just forged in sympathy, it was strengthened through a dangerous mutual understanding. In the late 70s and early 80s, both men were drowning in their own fame-fueled destruction. Elton, with his cocaine-fueled paranoia and emotional volatility, was spiraling just as Ozzy was being pushed to the brink by Black Sabbath's relentless touring, alcohol abuse, and internal tensions. They weren't friends then, not yet, but they were living parallel nightmares. According to newly revealed private letters and interviews, it wasn't until 2003, when Elton began sponsoring sobriety efforts and acting as a quiet mentor to other struggling artists, that the two rock icons truly reconnected. Sharon had once again called Elton for help. Ozzy had relapsed badly. A failed attempt at detox nearly ended with him hospitalized, and Sharon feared he was beyond saving. This time, Elton didn't just offer comfort, he offered a pact. "If you stay clean, I'll stay by your side. If you fall, I'll walk away." It was brutal, it was honest, and, for a time, it worked. Ozzy agreed to the deal and entered a strict rehabilitation program. Elton visited him multiple times, quietly, avoiding the press. According to a former Osbourne staffer, Elton even wrote daily letters, pep talks, prayers, brutally honest confessions from his own dark years. Ozzy reportedly kept them folded in a worn leather pouch he carried everywhere. But the truth was, neither of them had fully escaped the shadow of their addictions. For Elton, the damage of his past would always linger. For Ozzy, temptation was an ever-present whisper, just beneath the surface of fame and family. By 2005, cracks were already showing. A minor relapse led to an incident on the set of The Osbournes, where Ozzy wandered off during filming and was found hours later at a bar in downtown LA, incoherent and weeping. Elton was furious. According to a source close to him, he refused to speak to Ozzy for weeks, but eventually he relented. Because he saw something no one else wanted to acknowledge, Ozzy wasn't just addicted to substances. He was addicted to his persona, the chaos, the myth, the Prince of Darkness. And that addiction, Elton feared, might be the one that finally killed him. By 2009, whispers of another Ozzy meltdown began circulating once again, this time with darker implications. He had begun canceling shows, slurring interviews, and withdrawing from even his closest confidants. Sharon insisted everything was fine. But Elton knew better. He had seen this before, and so, against the advice of nearly everyone around him, Elton staged an intervention. It wasn't the Hollywood version with tearful speeches and a therapist on standby. This was a private ambush, conducted in Ozzy's own home, behind guarded gates in hidden hills. Elton arrived unannounced, along with a small group of mutual friends and medical professionals. Sharon was furious. Jack and Kelly Osbourne reportedly stormed out, but Elton was unwavering. "Ozzy," he said, "this ends today, or you do." Ozzy, groggy and clearly under the influence, erupted, screamed, cursed, accused Elton of betrayal. At one point, he allegedly tried to shove him, only to stumble and collapse on the floor. Elton knelt beside him, shook him gently, and whispered, "I'd rather lose your friendship than attend your funeral." What followed was an ugly, volatile night. Ozzy refused rehab. Sharon threatened to call the police if Elton didn't leave, and he did, devastated. But 3 weeks later, something changed. Ozzy checked himself into an inpatient facility in Arizona, quietly, without fanfare, without cameras. It was there, during that detox, that he wrote another letter, this time to Elton. The letter, which Elton finally revealed during a 2024 interview with The Guardian, was just 4 lines. "You saved me when I didn't want saving. I hated you for it, and I love you for it. Don't give up on me." Elton kept that letter in his piano bench for years, folded, worn, nearly falling apart. But the scars from that night never fully healed. The Osbourne family never forgave Elton for the public embarrassment, and for a long time, neither man spoke the other's name in interviews, until the next chapter of their story surfaced, a secret too big to stay buried. The final break came quietly. No screaming headlines, no public fallout, just a phone call, and a silence that stretched over a decade. In 2012, Elton John received news that shattered him. Ozzy, while publicly appearing sober and reformed, had relapsed again, privately, quietly, and dangerously. This time, it was prescription painkillers. After a fall on tour, he'd begun self-medicating, and by the time the tour wrapped, he was dependent once again. Sharon kept it hidden. The media bought the story of exhaustion, but Elton knew better. He flew to Los Angeles under the radar and asked to see Ozzy. He was turned away. Elton reportedly left a note, "I can't be part of this anymore," and that was it. No more phone calls, no more letters. For 10 years, they did not speak. Behind the scenes, Elton poured his grief into charity work and mentoring young artists struggling with substance abuse. When asked in interviews about Ozzy, he would smile tightly and redirect. Privately, he told friends he mourned Ozzy as if he were already gone. But in 2023, something changed. Word began to spread that Ozzy, now frail, recovering from multiple surgeries and facing his own mortality, had begun writing again. Not music, letters. One for each person he felt he had wronged. Elton received his in February 2024, delivered by hand, wrapped in black ribbon, and sealed with a wax stamp bearing Ozzy's initials. Inside was an apology, a confession, and something even more shocking, a proposal. Ozzy wanted to collaborate, one last project, one final act to honor what they had been, what they had survived. The contents of that letter, now leaked, would shake the industry, and what Elton did next stunned everyone. When Elton John opened the black ribboned envelope delivered to his Windsor estate in early 2024, he did so with trembling hands. He had no expectations, perhaps a brief apology, maybe a final goodbye. What he didn't expect was the weight of the letter inside. both physically and emotionally. Ozzy's handwriting, though shakier now, still carried the same frantic energy Elton remembered from the old notes. Only this time, there was something rawer, something final. Ozzy Osbourne had poured his soul into those pages. Not just regret, but confessions. The letter detailed years of denial, masked relapse, the breakdown of his marriage in ways the public never knew, and even previously undisclosed stints in rehab that had been covered up for the sake of his recovery image. But what hit Elton the hardest wasn't the confessions, it was the gratitude. "I never said thank you. I cursed you, blamed you, but never thanked you. Without you, I'd be a ghost, probably dead, and propped up on a stage like some puppet of metal nostalgia. You were the only one who ever told me the truth." Tucked into the envelope was another folded paper, a copy of a handwritten lyric sheet titled "Black Star Falling." At first glance, it seemed like an abandoned Ozzy track, moody, prophetic, and eerie. But then, Elton realized something that sent a chill down his spine. He'd seen these words before. In a 2006 draft of lyrics they'd scribbled together during a short-lived recording experiment that never saw daylight. Back then, the idea of the two of them doing a joint concept album was floated by management, but quickly shut down. Too risky, too chaotic, too unpredictable. But Ozzy had never let it go. And now, in his letter, he proposed reviving it. No tour, no labels, just you, me, and one truth-filled record before the curtain drops. It was a stunning gesture, but it also placed an impossible weight on Elton's shoulders. Saying yes would mean dredging up memories, pain, and time he wasn't sure he had the energy to face. So, he did what he hadn't done in over a decade. He flew to Los Angeles, and waiting for him at the edge of the Osbourne property was Sharon. Not smiling, not angry, just nodding. "Go on then," she said. "He's been waiting." Inside the sun-drenched sitting room of the Osbourne estate, Ozzy looked nothing like the towering metal god the world knew. Frail, hunched, with fingers that trembled around a teacup, he greeted Elton with a quiet, raspy, "Took you long enough, mate." They hadn't seen each other in over 10 years. And yet, as Elton sat down across from him, the silence was strangely comfortable. No cameras, no handlers, no platinum records hanging as trophies, just two aging legends, broken in different ways. What followed was not a grand reunion. There were no hugs, no fanfare, just hours of unfiltered truth. Ozzy spoke first. He apologized, not just for the past, but for the cowardice, the deceit, and the damage his lies had caused, not only to Elton, but to everyone who tried to save him. He admitted to manipulating his image, crafting redemption arcs for TV, while hiding relapses behind publicists. He spoke of the years he resented Elton for staging that 2009 intervention, and how, deep down, he had always known Elton was right. Then he shared something no one had ever heard. In 2017, during a secret hospital stay following a near overdose, Ozzy began writing a book. But it wasn't about fame or music. It was a collection of open letters. One for each person he believed he owed the truth. Most would never see the light of day. But the one to Elton? That one he wanted delivered. "You were the only one," Ozzy said, "who stood up and didn't flinch." Elton listened, occasionally nodded, but mostly he stayed silent, letting the full weight of Ozzy's confessions fill the space. When it was his turn to speak, Elton didn't sugarcoat anything. "You wrecked lives, Ozzy. You wrecked yourself. I wasn't angry you pushed me away. I was angry you gave up on yourself, on everyone." And then, softer, "But I never stopped caring." That day, no music was made, but something more important happened. Elton forgave him. They sat together, quietly planning. Not for a tour, not for a media blitz, but for one last act of creation, a private project, maybe for release, maybe not. But for them, and them alone. What no one knew then, however, was that the clock was already ticking. The world would only learn of the chapel sessions months later, long after studio logs were mysteriously leaked, and an engineer close to the project hinted at a final Ozzy-Elton collab that had gone completely under the radar. But the truth was stranger than fiction. In early 2024, after their private reunion, Elton and Ozzy began recording. Not in some luxury London studio or Los Angeles compound, but in a converted chapel in the English countryside that Elton had kept as a private creative retreat. The location was secret. No producers, no press. just a sound engineer, a nurse on standby for Ozzy, and hours of stripped-down, emotional songwriting. What they recorded over the next 3 weeks was unlike anything either of them had released before. No glam, no heavy effects, just piano, voice, and pain. The tracks were raw, laced with themes of regret, mortality, legacy, and fractured faith. Ozzy's voice cracked often. Elton's playing was restrained, almost reverent. One song, Ashes in Velvet, featured only 6 lines of lyrics, each one whispered by Ozzy and answered by Elton's falsetto. They completed 6 tracks before Ozzy's health began to decline again. Recording had to stop. According to insiders, the project was meant to be released as a surprise posthumously, Ozzy's final creative word, and Elton's tribute to the man he once nearly gave up on. But Sharon intervened. She feared it would be misinterpreted, that the public would see it as a death album, or worse, a publicity stunt. And so the files were locked away. The team was sworn to silence. Elton, heartbroken, respected the decision. But rumors swirled. And then, the leak. Track titles appeared on underground forums. A partial clip of Black Star Falling surfaced on Reddit. Fans were stunned by the rawness and the unmistakable intimacy of the lyrics. Suddenly, the world demanded to know, what had these 2 legends created in secret, and why had it been buried? In the months following the leak of the chapel sessions, silence surrounded the Osbourne and John camps. No confirmations, no denials, just a deafening quiet, as if the truth itself had been buried beneath layers of grief, privacy, and calculated legacy control. But fans, hungry for answers, began to piece together the fragments left behind. The most haunting track, Black Star Falling, had become a viral whisper, passed from listener to listener through re-uploads, grainy audio rips, and reaction videos that swore it wasn't just music, it was a message. In the track's final verse, Ozzy murmured, "If I go, don't light the pyre, just play that song and don't rewind, let it burn where it belongs, at the edge of time." No chorus, no grand finale, just that verse, and then silence. Speculation turned into obsession. Had Ozzy known his time was shorter than anyone had let on? Why had Elton agreed to record something so obviously intimate and painful if it wasn't meant to be shared? The real twist came when an anonymous source from within Rocket Entertainment, the company handling Elton's private catalog, leaked an internal email exchange. In it, Elton had written, "This project was never for charts. It was a lifeboat for both of us. And if it never sees the light of day, then let it at least be remembered as real." But what few people knew was that there had been one final attempt to revive the project. This time not as an album, but as a memorial. In March 2025, Ozzy suffered a quiet health relapse that forced him back into full-time care. Elton, now slower himself, flew to visit him again. But this time, Ozzy didn't speak. He listened. And when Elton played him Ashes in Velvet from his phone, his hand trembling as it hovered over the play button, Ozzy cried. It was the first time he'd shown emotion since his relapse, and the last time Elton saw him conscious. 2 weeks later, on a rainy April afternoon, Ozzy slipped into a coma. Sharon, at his side, whispered words the world would never hear. But beside her sat a small portable speaker. It played Black Star Falling on a loop. After Ozzy's passing, Sharon reached out to Elton personally, and in a moment that would shock both fan bases, she gave her blessing. "I think he wanted the world to hear it," she said, voice thick with grief. "He just didn't know how to say goodbye." So on what would have been Ozzy's 77th birthday, a limited vinyl release of the chapel sessions was announced. No press conference, no promotional tour, just a quiet drop. 6 tracks, 1 pressing, 1 final story between 2 legends. In the liner notes, Elton's final words were printed in delicate gold script. "You never stopped being a friend, even when you didn't know how to be one." The record sold out in 38 seconds. And just like that, the world finally understood. This wasn't about sales, scandals, or nostalgia. It was about closure. 2 titans of music reaching across the wreckage of fame and addiction to find something human again. Not fame, not forgiveness, just peace. In the end, Elton John didn't just open up about Ozzy Osbourne, He helped close the final chapter of a life lived in extremes. A final letter, a lost album, a hidden friendship. What would you have done in his shoes? Subscribe for more untold truths behind music's most complicated legends.